Welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your host, Chris, alongside my co host, Dean. And joining us for today's show is Natalia. And she's here to talk about some aliens and the spiritual and supernatural. Welcome to the show, Natalia.
I'm glad to be here. I've been looking forward to it for sure.
I'm actually really excited because when we have conversations like this, it's fun to see how they progress. Like sometimes we'll gravitate towards like one thing or another, and then just it'll organically shift to something else. But so, like, where do you want to start today?
I think we should start where I got my interest in the field, per se.
Brilliant. Love it.
Yeah. So, all the way from the beginning. So, I was born in Puerto Rico. I'm not going to go too much into that, right? But, yeah. So, basically, I was born in Puerto Rico, and in Puerto Rico is part of the Bermuda Triangle. So, Chris, as you know, there's a lot of crazy stuff over there. There's a lot of UFO sightings, chupacabras, and ghosts. There's a lot. So I grew up listening and hearing my family gather up at night, playing dominoes, having a few beers, and they would tell their stories of what was going on. Now, my family is they don't believe in it until they see it, but even when they see it, they kind of don't believe in it. So I kind of grew up, listening to all these things. And it wasn't until I got older that I started getting into it. I started reading more on it, listening. I'm Dolores Cannon, Bashar. I've started just immersing myself into that industry. And I started noticing that a lot of my family members' stories and experiences were almost identical to the experiences and encounters that some people have said. And I know that my family, they don't speak English. They're not into that stuff. So I was like, what? There has to be something. If everybody's saying the same thing, there has to be some kind of truth. So that's kind of what got me into that. But one of the biggest things that happened was one of my uncles, because my mom has eight siblings, but one of my uncles, he always has like weird things going on. And I know for sure he was abducted. Like he was abducted. I'll go in the beginning on why I think that. So he said, this was years ago. I was little. I was around 6 years old. It was around New Year's Eve, and my uncle and my aunt had just moved to their house, and it was New Year's. You could hear the party, the people being loud. Puerto Ricans are super loud.
And was this in Puerto Rico or was that over here?
No. This is all in Puerto Rico. And my uncle's telling the story. And I'll get back to I actually witnessed something coming out of him. But I'll go into that later. So it was New Year's Eve, and it was really loud. They were tired. They had just moved in. It was just him. They were in their 20s. They went to sleep. They're like, we don't care about New Year's. We're just going to go to sleep. And he said that he remembers looking at the clock. It was around, almost midnight, because he says, man, once it's 12 o'clock, it's going to be super loud. We're going to wake up. It was around like 11:30. And they went to sleep. And then all of a sudden he says that he opens his eyes and the room's like illuminated, but a weird, how do I explain it? He said it was like a faint, bright light, bluish. And he opens his eyes, he looks at the clock, and it was 12:05. But he didn't hear anything, absolutely anything. That's one of the things that they say when they get abducted, you don't even hear a pin drop, like nothing. He thought that was strange, and he looks at his wife, and his wife's like sitting up, like looking straight at the bed, just looking straight, pale. And when he looks, he sees this orb, like a bluish orb on the foot of the bed, just hovering. But he says he wasn't scared. He said he felt hypnotized. He said he just looking at it. He didn't have any emotion. And then all of a sudden the ball just moves right into them. They duck, they like move out of the way, and he says it goes onto the pillow and it dissolves. And they just look at each other and go back to sleep. That wouldn't be my reaction. I would be freaking renting a room or going to a hotel stay or something. It was just really overwhelming, but they didn't remember any of it. They didn't remember at all until the next day, when they started getting like flashbacks, and they're like, oh, it was just a dream, it was just
Piecing it together, sort of.
Yeah, but they didn't believe in any of that. So it's just a dream, probably, but I remember seeing it too, blah, blah. It's just, I don't know, we were just tired. He said after that, every single night, he would have night terrors of him laying on a bed, 2 short grays to the side and a tall gray in the I guess into the back or something. It was like 3 of them. Every single night, he would just have that dream. He started getting like an overwhelming feeling of paranoia, like they were watching him, but he doesn't believe in all that. So he's like, maybe I'm going crazy. His foot started swelling up really bad, to the point where I was at my grandma's house with my mom, and my mom's like, you need to get that checked out. You know how guys are. They're like, oh, no, it's fine. I'm not going to go to the doctor. I'm fine. It's just sprained it or something. My mom was like, no, you're going to go to the doctor. So my mom took me, 'cause I'm the oldest. I was 6. And she's like, no, we're going to go to the doctor. So we went to the doctor. And I remember thinking he was talked funny because he was an American guy and he had like an English accent, I guess, speaking Spanish. My uncle told the doctor, my foot, this and that. And what I thought was funny was that he was asking questions that didn't have anything to do with your foot. He was like, have you been having any strange experiences? Have you been having any weird dreams? Have you been having like mental health questions? And my uncle's like, what the hell does that have anything to do with it, But for some reason, the doctor was asking that. Then out of nowhere, he just takes a little scalpel and he takes his foot like underneath his ankle, or the little ankle bone, and he slides it. Like, I just remember because it was so gross. Like, he just opens it up and he takes out like a little black thing. It was very small, like maybe the head of a pencil, like right here, like something like that. Really small, black on black. I'm telling, like it was blacker than black. It was weird looking at it. And the doctor was not fazed at all. My uncle started screaming, saying, what was that? Almost fainting. My mom's like, what's going on? I didn't know what the heck was happening. And the doctor was like, oh no, I see it all the time. He was part of a nonprofit research group of doctors that were studying paranormal phenomena that was happening in Puerto Rico. And he's taking those things out of people all the time. My uncle's like, no, it can't be this and that, blah, 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 like aliens. And he kept it. I got to ask him if he still has it, but he kept it and he keeps telling everybody's story. Everybody thinks he's crazy, but it's such a strange little thing on there. And he said after that, the paranoia stopped. He stopped having the dreams and everything. That kind of was it. And even though that happened and he took out the little object, he would still have experiences where he would see UFOs, time would stop, and then it would just go and he would have lost time. And I told him the other day, I was like, you're still getting abducted. Just because you don't have the dreams or the little thing, you're still getting abducted from what I've seen. Doesn't mean it's bad or anything. It most likely means, from what I've read, it most likely means that he made a deal or he's part of them and they're basically correcting his frequency and his energy and all that stuff. That's why they kind of keep an eye on you. But he's had so many crazy experiences. That was the first one that I actually witnessed and saw.
First thing that I could think of is they cut open his ankle, just below his ankle, and they pull out that little black device thing. The first thing I thought of is when people keep track of wildlife and endangered species.
Yes.
That's immediately what I thought of. Some sort of tracking device that they could tag on to you. And it makes me wonder, why your uncle? That's the one thing that comes to mind. It's like, why do they pick certain people for these things? Do you think the aliens, and this is just me throwing this shit out there, please tell me if I sound stupid, that they monitor people? This is me putting my tinfoil hat on. They monitor specific people that will actively participate in our favorite word, Dean, cognitive dissonance, in the sense that it doesn't matter what they experience because they will deny it, because it will shake them to the core if they actually accept what's going on. So it's easier to deny it, even though it's like right there in front of you, because it allows them to cope and just go on with their life.
We'll be right back.
I have an overall fascination with making sure sex workers' history is retained in some way, because everyone else gets to know everyone else's story. And I feel like the people who are most deserving of that preservation of story feel like they have to die in silence in a way.
Well, we see the deepest, darkest secrets of men. And their desires and their fantasies and their issues too, and their phobias. Yeah, I think working girls do a lot of work they don't even realize,
Madam, a podcast about Julie Moya and New York City's most famous brothel.
I would wonder though, and you hit the nail on the head, Chris. That was actually one of the huge questions I had from this story, which is, what do you think, is there anything special about your uncle? But is there anything about him that you recall from your youth that might pop out as abnormal? Or was
Yeah.
he very, but it's okay. Okay, so please tell me, like, what about him as a person would you peg as abnormal or special?
For some reason, the weirdest, craziest things happen to him. Like lucky stuff, near death experiences, he gets saved. Like he's a welder. And one time he got a feeling to not go into the huge barrels to weld the oil rigs. Something told him not to. He said he heard it from somewhere. He told his friends not to go, and they went, and all three burned alive, like right in front of him, melted skin and everything. One time he was at a parking lot and he was talking to my mom, and then he just started seeing rolled up $100 bills just freaking just all in front of him, and he picked them all up. It was like $2,000. Somebody had stolen an ATM and or a car register, cash register, and it just exploded.
Yeah.
It's just weird things that happen that you don't really say, like, that doesn't, it's been so many that, like, near car crashes, like, oh, it's just crazy. Like, he's protected by something, and like he's very, I don't know, he's very empathetic, like he's really nice, like everybody likes him, his energy's awesome. But one of the things that I have noticed that was very similar to, that might explain, one of the things that I noticed was from Bashar and Dolores Cannon. What they say is that most of these beings that are being abducted, that have multiple times, like my uncle, have a pact or a soul contract and are one of the aliens. Their alien body is in the
Hybrid or, oh, right.
Huh?
No, sorry. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah. In the spaceship.
Yeah, it's in the spaceship, and they agreed that they would be abducted and they would have to be studied, for example, but they're human. They have to reincarnate here, and their human body won't accept that, because at the end we're human. We're conditioned by what we learn and, everything else. But your soul, or his soul, comes from that. And that's why they get taken.
This is so crazy that you bring this up. And I've been actually thinking about this for the last week or so. So there's a video, if you haven't seen it, if you guys don't even, I know, Chris, you know who this guy is, but Natalia, if you've never heard of this guy, Bob Lazar, you ever heard of
Yes,
that name?
yes.
Okay.
Bubba.
Okay. So we're all very intimately familiar with Bob Lazar and his stories and whatever. But one thing that's been popping up on my feeds as I doom scroll every day, like I've been seeing recently, like his speech about how, we're vessels for souls, for extraterrestrials and all that stuff. And I never really paid much attention to that before. I've seen it before, and I kind of just wrote it off in a way. But recently I've been thinking more, like playing some examples and some thought experiments in my head about what that would mean if you had extraterrestrials treating us as vessels. What would be the implications of that for us as the self while we're aware on this earth or whatever? Then you come along and bring this story about your uncle, who seems, pretty innocuous. Like most people, for the sake of definition, are average. But there are some things and nuances about us that we don't understand. Why are there some things we can sense? Like why do we seem like there's these weird coincidences that shouldn't be? We know enough about statistics and mathematics and the likelihood of probability. We know enough about that. Even if we didn't have normal or like a deep education on it, we still know enough to be like, is that really like that? The probability of that, you start lining up the things that would have to happen for something to be probable to happen in your life, and you're like, come on, like, really? Like, you just get to that point where you're like, like, really? So I really agree with you that there's something more for certain people. Especially, I've never heard such a compelling story about an individual as your uncle. And you also don't even really talk to people very often who get insight into these people's lives. So you have that from your youth. You've
Mhm.
seen that, like, he went through all these experiences that didn't make sense and they were very strange. And then they were leading up to this point. So if you take that vessel idea that Bob Lazar laid out there years ago, how would you interpret this situation through that lens, about, like you were saying, about souls and how extraterrestrials might treat them in the next life or whatever, like uses and whatnot?
I definitely think that some of us are vessels, for sure, for some of them. Not just Bob Lazar. I don't know if you guys are familiar with, I mentioned them earlier, Bashar and Dolores Cannon.
For the listeners, could you go into quick detail of who
Yeah.
those two are?
Yeah, Dolores Cannon, she started off as a hypnotherapist. She had an encounter with past life regression. In that time, it was taboo in hypnotherapy to ask what happens before you're born. And I didn't believe in any of that stuff. I'm like, come on, like it's all fake. And so I started getting more and more in depth into it. And she started studying life after death. And then it came to a point where she had so much experience with past life regressions and everything. And then she encountered, after a few years of that, she encountered somebody who had a past life in another planet. And these are hypnotherapy sessions where they record it, you're under, and you receive everything you said, like you receive it back. And apparently they say that you can't even believe that it was you saying and talking like that. Like, it's really like in depth. But a lot of people that have these time lapses, like my uncle, like he doesn't know where the time goes. He gets abducted. When you get abducted, apparently you have missed time. So a lot of people that have missed time, they're like, what's going on? Was I kidnapped by somebody? They don't think supernatural per se until they go under, and then something happens and they kind of start believing. But one of the things that they all had in common was that most of these people that were abducted always reported the agreement they had with the species, whatever species it was. And it was either for a mission to increase, the vibration, or it was to study the human race better and see how their race could adapt. It's just a bunch of different things, apparently, that they have agreed to, like a scientist, I would say, would agree to go into the field,
One of them coming down as a scientist. I could just picture it now, them taking notes from their spaceship.
Yeah.
These people love fucking killing each other.
Yeah, they
blacklist this planet.
Oh, he's shoving a bowl of cheese in his mouth again. That fat asshole.
Right, you're like, should we eliminate this planet? Should we do universe a favor or what? Yeah, it's crazy. And the more I got into it, the crazier it sounded, but then the more sense it made for me. So if you told me about
I'm sorry, I'm just like, my brain is going nuts because I've never thought of this before. I've never heard of this before, where like I can picture it, like Chris was saying, like we've seen the quintessential movie or show every once in a while. It's like, oh, we have this spy, but we had to wipe his mind for him to go undercover. Okay, well, holy shit, like that kind of like fits, right? Like, well, if you can somehow transmorph or like move a consciousness or a soul from a extraterrestrial entity into a human, if that was compatible, then the sky's the limit, right? It's like, oh, we just have to wipe his mind. He goes down and does this stuff, and maybe we have to nudge him every once in a while, or her, and then get the output that we need. I've never thought of that. That's really like
reminds me of the movie Avatar, if y'all seen it.
Yeah,
Avatar. Yeah, there you go.
Avatar with the giant blue aliens.
Yes, it's funny you say that, because Avatar, I read that the writer of Avatar based a lot of the story from the Taino Indians from Puerto Rico and their closeness to their gods, which if you really think about it, these gods, they didn't have a word for alien. It was these powerful beings that came from the sky and helped them. It just starts making sense. But I'll go a step further and tell you that when my uncle was little, they lived in a little, smaller home in the mountains, and they had chickens. They had chickens in the back, in the big pens. And my mom says that one day it was raining a lot. Everybody heard the chickens going crazy, just absolutely bizarre. They're like, oh my gosh, this might be, a pack of dogs, because dogs used to be there all the time and they would eat the chickens. Well, the next morning, my grandpa and my mom, everybody went to go and check on the chickens, and most of them were dead. But the pen wasn't opened or anything. There was no holes on the bottom. It was, those pens that have like the little crisscross metal things. And the few chickens that were there were hiding under a board, shaking to death. And the chickens that were dead did not have any blood on them, but had 2 holes on the neck and were drained completely from the blood. That's where the chupacabra thing comes from. I was like, it could be pack of dogs. It was raining. There was no footprints or anything. But then I heard from one of the researchers that, the researching and the books that I've been reading, that most of the time when a chupacabra incident happens, or they take the blood away from the animals or something like that, it's extraterrestrials that take the samples of the animals that are being fed to their specimen, my uncle, that was living there, to see the changes that it does to the body. So they were basically taking the blood or the sample of the elements of what is feeding into the human body, which would be my uncle.
Right. Yeah.
That's crazy.
And one thing that people don't think about too, with a story like that or an example, is if you want to think about if this is all like, this is how things are playing out, the way we're seeing, or the evidence that we're seeing, you have to think about what the aliens' perspective, or the level at which they're technologically viable to do these things. And for me, what it comes down to is like some people, if they had like a science fiction mind, they're like, well, why don't they just beam up the animal? Like, why don't they just freeze time, put a time bubble around it, and like why do they have to like do it in such a way that they can get caught? And I think this ties back in with the idea about how some people are abducted, and sometimes they remember the abduction and then they report it. Chris and I have actually talked about this before, where it's like, well, if there's something going on, because you think like from the aliens' perspective, their most ideal situation is one in which they come in, they do their thing, they get their data, and they get out without anyone knowing, period. But what does it mean that they slip up? Like, what is it that, like, to me, that either means that they don't understand us completely, which would make sense because they're studying us. But also, like, if they're doing things like disrupting, taking blood from animals and leaving the dead carcasses, surely they know that if they leave the carcass behind, that's going to raise questions for the humans that they're studying. So there seems like they're not omnipresent. They're not completely infallible. Like, they make mistakes and there are things that happen. And to me, I think that's equally as fascinating, because that means that they're also on this progression of life and existence where they don't understand a lot of the things that they're interacting with. And that's actually a really heavy concept, right? Like the idea that the doctor was pulling things out of your, or that thing out of your uncle's ankle that was blacker than black, which, by the way, I looked it up. That's a thing. It's called Vanta black. It's like, it absorbs like 99.9% of light.
Oh, wow.
It's an actual color. I've never heard an alien story, by the way, or an abduction story that included someone describing the material as like Vanta black, like so black that it's the blackest black ever.
Really?
So, yeah, sorry, that's a lot to unpack there, but I'll toss it back to you. Like, what are your perspectives on what I just, the perspectives I've given? Any insights or thoughts?
Yeah. I always ask myself that, and I actually went down the rabbit hole. Like, I've read so many books and seen so many. Just, anyways, from my studies, I don't know, from my research, they were learning. There came a time where they didn't understand the pain and seeing. They didn't want them to remember. And now, if you notice, back in the day, there were a lot more abduction stories than now. There were a lot of more probing. You don't hear that anymore. They were able to basically, I guess, science, doctors back in the day thought that babies didn't feel pain, So I feel like they are adapting and themselves learning about us. That's why I think they're fascinated with us. And one of the main things is they can't interfere in a way. So trying to make sure that person doesn't remember anything is definitely part of their test, I guess, or their.
Yeah, could be. Like, maybe they want to be caught. Like, maybe they want us to know. The test is the test, sort of thing, right?
Yeah. I got a question for you, Natalia. Are you ever afraid of that whole concept of what extraterrestrials are doing with the abductions and stuff like that? Is there a part of you that thinks, some of this could be nefarious in some sort of way, in which to go down a dark path, they're probably trying to find an organic life form that could be some sort of sustenance for them? So they're scoping something out. I know I just got really dark that we would become a food source for them, but I enjoyed the Star Trek and Star Wars and all that Ancient Aliens type of stuff. The one thing that I always think of is how similar to humanity are these aliens, because humans by nature, we are power hungry, we don't like one another, we find reasons to kill each other, we exploit each other for resources. If you look at the way that history played out with colonialism, what happened when the Spaniards encountered the Aztecs and the Taínos and Hispaniola and Puerto Rico and Florida? What happened? You had a technologically superior group of people that took advantage of the other. Because from my perspective, if aliens came down and made themselves known, like they just decloaked and like, hey, we're here, yada, 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 my first inclination would be like to look back at our own past and use that kind of as a marker of how things could potentially go. Clearly, we can't beat you. We're not stronger than you. You are that much more technologically advanced. So what do you want from us aside from our resources or us in general or our planet?
So again, I don't want to keep referencing like where I'm getting this stuff from. It's just again, it's my own viewpoints from all the research that I've done, everything that I've read and witnessed, and all this stuff. Okay, just want to put that out there. So there are different types of aliens. The most common ones are the grays, and the grays are us in the future that come from a timeline where they have put all their presence in technology and have basically genetically evolved in a way that they can no longer be able to reproduce. That's why they were taking the sperm and the eggs and stuff, because they're trying to have these hybrids. And there have been people that have said that they have hybrid babies that they actually take up there. They're super open about it because now there's a lot of people that are open about it. People saying that they communicate with them, that they've been taken and they've seen their hybrid babies and all that stuff, because apparently previously they had hybrid babies, but again they're learning, like Dean said, they're in a learning experience, and the hybrid babies would die because they had no human contact with any, like they're not very emotional, so they would just leave the babies there, and then they wondered why the babies came out the way they did. So then now they're taking the humans where they take the eggs from so they can mother them for a while. That's what I heard. So it would make sense. But apparently they came from a timeline where they literally demolished their Earth, and they're trying to avoid that from happening again. So they're over here. They came to this Earth to basically avoid that from happening, because we're at that point where either it can go left or right. So they can't completely tell us about it because it'll mess up a bunch of stuff apparently, and it has to come from like within us. And they've tried to expose themselves and it doesn't work. That's what I believe.
You know what's really heavy about the whole concept you just shared is we live in our time as we are now. And when I say as we are now, we're talking about all of our quirks and our requirements. We have emotions, whatever, like whatever you want to fill in the gap there, but that might not be translatable to other creatures or conscious minds.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to be in a situation where our world was falling apart, and think about the joke with like Congress. It's like Congress can solve all of the problems for America if they just look 40 years out and like try to plan for 40 years. Somebody has to eat some shit first before we just make it a utopia, but no one wants to eat the shit first. They want to focus on how do we get as much stuff now, and then we keep depleting. So like, I think the same thing, right? So like if we're alive now, the idea is, well, how do we preserve us as now? Instead of thinking like, well, we're the product of evolution or whatever, we're eventually going to evolve beyond what it means to be the humans we are now.
Mm-hmm.
If you kind of like translate that into the situation, like if you go to the future a million years and say, oh, like aliens are us, they are what we become in the future, and they've ruined their world, they've destroyed it, they've dismantled it. Like you said, they're trying to come back and fix it. But from our perspective, they would be the aggressors, right? Because they're coming back into a timeline that things didn't happen originally. But if we were to do that, would we consider ourselves as aggressors? I guess some of us would, because it's not right. And I like to kind of like paste that onto that idea that they would be doing that, unless they don't have any other emotions in the future. But if they come back and they start messing with their timeline, they must know that the people or the aliens coming back are not going to exist anymore, right? Because if you change the timeline, then all of the people or the aliens that exist in the future are going to be gone, because you're trying to get to a level that replaces everything. So to them, maybe it'd be heroic. Like they're
Yes,
sacrificing themselves to make
yeah.
things better.
Yes.
To us, it's bad, right? Because they're coming in and they're abducting us, they're messing with our DNA, it's evil. So
Mhm.
it's strange, right? It's such a weird idea to play with.
Dude, I'm no time travel scientist, but from what I understood with the concept of time travel, it wouldn't necessarily be affecting their timeline. So what they would in fact be doing is when they go back in time, they go to a specific point in time. And because they distorted a timeline, another timeline would branch out in which there is a different outcome. So if somebody went back in time and shot Hitler in the head in the trenches of World War One, our timeline would still have Hitler in World War Two.
Yeah.
But that new timeline would have something different.
Yes.
So
So you're
what I
talking
would under
multiverse, right?
exactly. So it would be a branch off timeline in which they push humanity so they don't become what the Greys are.
Right. And another thing they're doing with the hybrid beings is that they're trying to make sure that their species survives, and these hybrid beings are able to adapt and live on Earth where they can't. They've evolutionized in a way that they cannot come down here and live a normal life. So the only way is to try and avoid us from doing what happened to them, and then them mixing with the hybrids so that they can come and their species can continue to survive.
So my question for you guys would be, once, like, let's say they succeed in what they're trying to do, the aliens that come back that would effectively not exist in the progression of the current timeline, would they go back to a future timeline in which they change, so it would be a different timeline? Or like, because if you're saying there's multiple branches of timelines, like if they come back and they're the same way and they change something, they're going to stay the same in this timeline because there's still another timeline that exists in which they ended up becoming who they are. But if they come back to this timeline and change it, are they going to stick in this timeline and then just go into the future and hope that it's like bells and whistles and rainbows? But then how will they be accepted? Like, where will they go if they change the timeline and they don't just disappear based off of, like, say, like the grandfather conundrum, where you go back, you kill your own grandfather.
Mhm.
How are you still alive? So in your minds, I'm not challenging you, but I'm just curious, where would they go if they succeeded in changing what they needed to change here?
From my understanding, and again, Bashar, which is another one of the people that I mentioned, his name's Daryl Inca, and he channels Bashar, which is a great entity that's trying to that's communicating with us in helping us basically wake up and go into this new earth, trying to help in changing the timelines. And even if you don't believe he's actually channeling this being, if you actually hear the things he says, it blows your mind. It's amazing. But one of the things he says is he mentions that because he's one of those from that timeline that's here. You know, he's here from a different timeline where they destroyed their earth and they would stay here. They would stay here and continue to educate and just be a part of it because their timeline's gone. Even if they change it, because again, this is a different earth.
The one understanding I would have, and Dean, you're gonna laugh at this. It's future Trunks, dude. He kills the androids in the past with Goku, and then he goes to his future, and they're still there because it's a branched off timeline. It doesn't necessarily mean that what he did is going to change his future. It's just going to change the timeline that he jumped into. So, from my understanding, and this is could be completely wrong because we can't time travel, is that you would have multiple offshoots of that. So who knows how many times they have gone back in time to change certain parameters indirectly. Let's say, for example, they decide to go back to antiquity and they prevent the assassination of Caesar. That completely changes the trajectory
And
of the ancient world.
to that point, the channelers and the metaphysical community say that the Trump assassination was one of those things. Initially, he should have died, and they intervened, and this is the path that it needs to take to change that. But one of the things that I always questioned is the Bible is made up of a bunch of scriptures, right? But
Mhm.
so much more has been left out. Why has it been left out? And for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and the Catholic Church doesn't want to recognize it. But why? When most some of the it should be a part of it. It's just there's so many things that I feel, as you know, for the former Catholic, that were were made to control, or at least have society in control, like laws. Before laws, there was, you had religion, you put fear into them of a higher self or a higher being, that they don't know what happens when you die. So, stuff like that. I just never sat right with me. I just felt like so much more was missing. And I feel like Jesus was definitely interpreted different. Like he came and it was so simple. Like if you I feel like it was so much simpler than what humans made it out to be eventually. It was just literally love and this, and like, just treat everybody with love, and
Yeah.
be in this state of mind. But then I feel like a lot of people just rolled with it. I don't know. That's just
It makes sense, and I think I agree. I mean, I do agree with you in the sense that if you compare it to, say, the Old Testament or something, where like things were more austere and harsh,
mhm.
like the God was very vengeful, and then
Yeah.
suddenly you had somebody coming on the scene preaching love and acceptance and balance and all that stuff. But like I think that's also translatable to multiple different religions and figureheads and spirituality, which is strange, right? It's almost like something in us that's innate deep down is saying, it's screaming like, hey, like this is the next step towards benefit for humanity or equilibrium or whatever. Like,
Mhm.
you go from the trenches of tribalism, where it's tribe against tribe, and I know we still have that even in 20 fucking 24. People are still tribe against tribe because we have a sports team against sports team, or political group against political group. Like, it's still very much embedded, and it's a real thing that really gets people hurt and killed and worse. And all that stuff, like, that is very real in our nature. But what is the part of us that is saying, like, wait a minute, we don't need to do this. We can try to solve our problems equally and share and all that stuff. And then I know you get too political, you get to the other side, like, oh, now you're talking about communism, and like, communism is, blah, blah, blah. And I know, but for real though, like, there is an equilibrium. And my question for everybody who has ever been like listening or thinking about any of this stuff is like, where does that equilibrium come from? Is there truly, or like, an omniscient good entity out there looking out for us? Or is it kind of just like us as humans forcing our way into a positive direction for a good balance of life? I don't know. What are your guys' perspectives on that?
I'm going to tell you my beliefs. This is a very, very unique planet in the universe. Very unique. We are here, humans are here to learn and to evolutionize. That's the goal. Earth is like a school. The humans that come to Earth, they come to learn. The reason Earth is unique is because there's free will. And even though you come here and you have a mission, you forget everything and you have free will. So you have to really look into yourself. Like Jesus said, you have to live with love. And that's how you're going to be able to evolutionize. And the souls that continue to choose not to, because again, you have free will, continue to reincarnate. And it wasn't supposed to be this hard, but it is. And Jesus came to teach us the way, but then, it kind of didn't work. So now the second coming of Jesus, he's not going to come in flesh like people think. He's going to come consciously to wake people up. And that's why you've been seeing a lot of people questioning the ideologies that society has always fed into them, because they're kind of waking up to the realization that they've been stuck in this loop in their own way. Christians call it the second coming. People that are even atheists feel like there's something definitely going on. There's something going on. You can't deny that. It just, you can feel it in the air, so that's what I think.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, and it's not the first time I've heard the concept of essentially they call it a prison planet.
Yeah.
You ever hear that? Yeah.
Mhm.
In which you come to here to learn and to make amends for what you've done previously, because I personally believe that, and I think this goes against my Catholic beliefs, that there are past lives, that we've had past lives, and that we are drawn to specific things based off of our past lives,
Mhm.
the things that we like. And because my mom always had this thing with me ever since I was like 2, 3 years old. I'm not sure how old you are, Natalia, but I'm going to be 34. And I remember like when the History Channel started in like 1995 or whatever. And I was always glued to ancient Rome. Always, ever since I was a kid. And my mom would always yell at me in Spanish. She's like, "You're gonna become a murderer because all you do is watch these war things." And for whatever particular reason, I was always drawn to it. Always drawn to it. No rhyme or reason. There's no reason for a freaking 4 or 5-year-old to be so drawn to ancient history because I had no basis in it. They don't talk about that shit in kindergarten. Nothing. Always drawn to it. So I believe that, what we experience in our past lives directly influence what we're interested in our present existence. But what I did want to ask you, I have a couple of questions here. You said you were raised Catholic. Like me, I was raised Catholic. My mom's Dominican. You're from a Puerto Rican household. How did your upbringing affect, the stories you heard from your family and your introduction into, deep diving into the paranormal and aliens?
It started with me trying to prove what I believe now wrong, because I was, there's so many religions out there, and you're telling me now that the one I was born into this life is the right one. It's just strange. But anyways, I went into the deep dive trying to say, no, Catholicism, what my beliefs are right, this is wrong, and I'm gonna just dig deeper, and went into that rabbit hole, and I ended up seeing what I see now to be my truth, at least. And it explains my experiences, it explains my downloads, it explains what people have witnessed. Because honestly, if you think about it, the Bible was written by prophets. The prophets, they talked to God. Where are they now? Where's the prophets of today's society? If God's talking to you, you're considered crazy, schizophrenic, and they put you in a facility. I don't understand that. But back in the day, you're going to believe a prophet thousands of years ago, and you're sure that he spoke to God. What about the prophets now? So I went into more of a deeper dive about the prophets now, and they almost all say the same thing about this new coming of earth, about Christ consciousness, about shifting into the just all these different things. One thing that really did bother me is in the Bible, it says there's only 144,000 beings that will be saved. I was like, no, that sounds just what? I did not like that at all. You know,
It's like the guy, like, he's like being asked these heavy questions, and like he just looks over to some stone that has like the number 144, and he's like, 144 people. And then the
Yeah.
person's like, really? Is that all? It's like, 144,000. Like, like
That
he's
was
just like
probably the population
ad-libbing.
size of his entire
Right,
city
yeah.
state. He's like,
Yeah, it's like
all of your
1/10 of everyone. It's actually that'd actually be brilliant. Like, go back and look to the statistics of whoever made that assumption likely based off of like the population. Maybe it was like 20% or 30%,
but
and then just multiply that towards humanity. I don't know.
it's just weird. That's such a specific number. So I went into a deeper dive on what's happening. What are these prophets now saying? And some of the prophets in the metaphysical community are saying that it's not 144,000 people are going to be saved. It's that it takes 144,000 people to raise their vibration for Earth to be saved. That it doesn't mean that 144,000 people,
Interesting.
are only
Okay.
going to be saved.
Well, shit. If it takes 144,000, if it takes 144,000 people to elevate Earth's vibration, then we're in trouble because we've got 8 billion people on this planet. That's a really small percentage. That means we're getting worse. we should
No,
have
that
we
means
should
we
have
have a
enough
higher
people by now.
probability.
but not really, because again, if you do it with love, and love conquers more than anything. So I'm not sure if you know, but there is a lot of community, especially in South America, where you can even study metaphysics in an accredited college. That metaphysics I'm actually getting my bachelor's in metaphysics from the University of Sedona, and it's actually
Very
been
cool.
accredited, I believe.
Nice.
And there's a couple of universities that have actually, you could either study medicine or metaphysics, but it's all about just your frequency, because now technology has come so far that you do have an aura, and you do have frequency, and you do have energy and energy field, and these were things that the Buddhist has always known about, for example. But if now we're able to kind of prove it with, for example, have you guys seen the water experiment where you speak to water badly and you look it under the microscope, and horrific and you speak with
No.
love and kindness and you see
Oh,
beautiful, perfect snowflakes. Because energy
interesting.
vibrations and even your thoughts and your words, they have an energetic field. They have a frequency. That's why they say curse words are curse words, because you're cursing yourself and those around you, even thinking bad, you know?
Well, shit.
I can seriously, I could buy into that 100%
Yeah.
because I've been thinking about that a lot lately as well. It's like you can measure anything in science. Like if you have a receptor or a detector strong enough, theoretically you should be able to take in data from whatever source that's giving off energy. And if we're angry, I mean, people talk about this all the time. I really believe this. You talk about negative energy. You're like, let's say you're so focused on yourself and like, oh fuck, I lost so much money. Oh fuck, like my family, blah blah blah. Like I'm not getting the job I want. Like this is terrible. You're staying in that resonance. Like you're staying in that state.
And you're gonna
And
attract more of that. Mm-hmm.
yeah,
You know,
and I
there is
really,
something to that. There is something
you
to
think
that.
so, right? Because you're the one
Because
too. Like, yeah.
I've done it myself on a couple of occasions. So I'm a project manager, an IT project manager, and anyone listening to this that's a project manager or deal with the IT world or anything like that, you know, it's a fucking shit show all the time. And you just practice, go into your day with a good mindset. Today's going to work out. Everything's going to be fine. You feel so much better. So I personally think there is definitely something to that.
Absolutely. And the thing is that whether you believe it or not, it's working for or against you. The frequency and energies in the field, in the earth field, they don't know if it's good or bad. You're attracting it, you're a magnet to that. Whether you feel bad or good, you're going to attract more of that. So the more you feel, that's why when like sometimes you wake up and you stub your toe and then you spill coffee on your shirt and the day just, oh my gosh, the day keeps going worse because you're adjusting your frequency like a radio to that those choices, so they come to you.
It's like okay, so like let's be honest. We've all had moments in our life. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're freaking the Buddha. You've had moments in your life where you've had a breakdown, where you're just either so sad or so angry, where you just like throw something, right? And you throw something against the wall, and you're like, "Fuck!"
Why are you calling
and
me
you
out
throw.
like that, bro?
I just did this the other day. Like you throw something against the wall and it bounces off and hits you in the nuts or your face or something. You know what I mean? Like, okay, like you just like if you didn't have to throw that shit, but you just did, and you made yourself worse for it. You inflicted additional pain to your body because you threw something and it deflected and hit you in the face. I think that there is absolutely something to that. We like to call that a curse, right? Like let's think about that for a second. Like we think like, oh, I'm cursed because if I throw something against the wall and it bounces off and hits me in the head, what's the probability of that happening? But in reality, it's not something attacking you or making your life worse. It's you like literally taking action in a frequency that makes you move your body in a certain way that flings that thing, and there's a physical nature to it. There's physics involved. So you throw it in such a way that subliminally like it's going to come back and hit you in the head. And like, is that a wake up call? I don't know. It's kind of creepy, right? Like
Yeah.
there's some strange things going on there.
And I'll take it a step further with that. Collectively, our thoughts affect things. So that's why prayer works so much, because in prayer, whatever religion you are in, when it's together, you're all collectively increasing the energy to have a certain outcome. This is one of also the reasons why the media, which that the cabal and the elites, I don't know if I can say that, but they want to keep us at a state of fear, because collectively having us in a state of fear causes them to be able to be in control. If you're against war, don't protest war. Protest peace and love. You going against thinking that you're doing something because you're against war, for example, you're attracting more war because you're thinking of war. You need to go the different direction, eliminate war, and go pro peace, for example, or for love. And the media feeds you things to keep us in a constant state of fear so that we collectively don't change the agenda and timeline that they have.
Now, you know what's interesting is that your algorithm, that definitely affects how you feel, because you like a news article and that's all that pops up. But again, like you said earlier, and like I talked about in my Demonology 301 episode, free will. We have the choice. And I always give the example, if you see an advertisement of like a gentleman's club and they're advertising this and this and that, and you know that doing that is wrong, but you still do it, it's still your choice.
Mm-hmm.
So you still have the option to do it. But I did want to segue into maybe the final couple questions. If you have any other questions, Dean. My question for you, Natalia, is we are both from Latino backgrounds. The people in the Caribbean and South America and Central America, we seem to be a little bit more sensitive to the paranormal and the other side. In your opinion, why do you think that that might be a thing?
In my opinion, we tend to have had past lives that were more in sync into those things. For example, Puerto Rican, Caribbean, the Caribbean, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Cuban, it's been linked to Atlantis, which Atlantis has had a lot of, it was very spiritual. And it was one of the resets, one of the many resets that Earth went through because humanity didn't evolve or go the direction that the people in charge at the time wanted. So they wiped it out, start cleaning. It's just like when you play a game. For example, Sims, I love playing Sims and I don't like how it turns out. I'm like, man, there's like no way of going back. Let me just delete it and start over. So that happened many, many times until Source, God said, okay, that's enough. We're not going to put them through this again. You guys are going to have to solve it out one way or another. So this is the last time. And that's why they're intervening. They tried to intervene physically, Mayans, Aztecs, that didn't work. And apparently they had a lot of many different, the Galactic Federation used Earth as a little playground. They had humans here, humans here, humans here, and they gave them different ideologies to see what would happen. And it all turned out they would just try and kill each other. The only human type that actually was able to evolve were the Mayans, which makes sense because there's like a huge mystery on the Mayans as to how they did all disappear, like out of nowhere. And they actually were taken and given a planet of their own. They were able to evolve to a point of being able to use their abilities, like the gods, the aliens were able to tell them. But apparently all the other ones they had to eliminate. Like before Atlantis, there was something else. I forgot the name, but apparently they said no more.
That's awesome. Like I've never heard any of that story before, and I can understand what the progression you're following. And Chris, what's your perspective?
No, that's an interesting concept to me. I've never heard of that before. The Atlantis stuff, I teeter back and forth with Atlantis because I think was it Plato or Aristotle that actually wrote about Plato?
Mhm.
Yeah, he actually wrote about Atlantis being past the Pillar of Heracles. And what's past the Pillar of Heracles? The Atlantic Ocean. So around there somewhere close to the Americas. So it's an interesting concept to me. This is all new to me, honestly.
Yeah,
And
that's
it makes
awesome.
me
And I'm
wonder.
glad you guys are open about it because it's pretty cool. These are things that like a few years ago you would have mentioned. I'd be like, girl, you crazy, But these are things that like I've actually read up and just I don't know, it's a lot from it just makes sense. And also one of the reasons why Bermuda is Bermuda and has weird things going on underneath in the water, there's actually a very old glass pyramid that belonged to Atlantis. It was an energy power grid. And sometimes randomly it activates and deactivates. And some ships and planes that go through and it accidentally activates, it sends them to a different reality or dimension. But that's the reason for why Bermuda is Bermuda. It's Atlantis technology underneath.
Wasn't there a story during World War II? I know the History Channel picked up on this at some point, but I can't remember exactly the story.
The
But like
squadron of World War II.
the squadron, right? Like they
Yep.
disappeared and like over the
Off the coast
Bermuda
of Florida.
Triangle and like that's yep,
Many
that's a
is
heavy story.
yeah,
Yep.
many.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
No
And
trace, no crashes, no wreckages, nothing. They all just
yeah,
disappeared.
they just disappear. And you know what's funny? Bashar says this, and Dolores Cannon also says this, and it makes sense. Said that there's another version of Earth where instead of disappearing, they come out. So instead of disappearing through the Bermuda, they have ships and planes coming out, and they don't know where it came from. So
Chris and I have talked about time slips before. So Chris, imagine like a world where that's the truth, where like, why do we have time slips in this reality? Because it's exactly what Natalia is saying, where like, another reality, like their reality loses their ship or their whatever, and then it ends up in our reality for like 5 seconds and then poof.
but
That's actually really interesting.
there's been there are documented cases. A man back in the day, like talking about like 1900s, was walking to, this was in New York, was walking to the grocery store, disappeared. His family never saw him again. And it wasn't until like the 1990s, out of nowhere, a man appears in the middle of the street, gets killed. They check his wallet, and it connects to a man that disappeared in the 1900s.
Wow.
They were able to
We never
trace
heard
back
that.
the family, and they said that he had disappeared. But to him, he jumped from one thing to the other and
Like
and
jump
passed away.
jump
And
time.
the other guy, and that this is documented. And there's this other guy that he was flying in the airport, and he had a passport, and he was trying to get to his country that doesn't exist. And
Torrid.
and his passport was legit, and he thought they were pranking him. They put him in a hotel room guarded because they thought he was a terrorist. Guy freaking disappears. There's been weird things that you just like, all right, come on. Like, if it's happening a lot, there has to be something going on, you know.
No, I completely agree, and we actually talked about that guy a couple episodes ago,
Oh,
Dean,
nice, yeah.
with
I
the man
remember.
from
Yep.
the man from Torrid. Yeah. So I always adopt the Socratic method of I know that I know nothing.
Me
So
too.
I will never presume to know exactly what it is that is going on,
Absolutely.
because new things can always be presented to us every day.
Yeah.
So we always try to keep an open mind on this show.
Mhm.
And like I said before we came on air, like, we're not here to judge people. We're here to just have awesome conversations,
Yeah.
with
that.
our listeners and our guests. So my last question for you today, Natalia, is, we touched on this a little bit earlier. Given everything you talked about today, the whole thing with your uncle, the whole thing with the paranormal, and just like growing up in Puerto Rico, people not being receptive to this stuff, in your opinion, why do you think that is?
They're scared. They're scared of being told that everything they were raised up to be is a lie. They're scared of things that they don't have control over. And it's normal. You're scared of things you don't understand. And I completely understand that. But I feel like because of the use of technology, because people are waking up, we've come to a time where it's okay to talk about it now. Maybe not to everybody, but a lot more people are listening and can relate to you. Or maybe, it listening to, for example, like this podcast could maybe awaken some people. They could, start relating to it, and it happens. I've read a couple books, I've heard a couple people that woke me up. So it's an interesting time right now, and I feel like it's been long overdue.
Natalia, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. This was a really fun conversation. I know Dean and myself really enjoyed talking to you today. There's so much more that we could talk about, so we
I
would
keep
love
going,
to
but yes.
have you back on if you're
Yeah,
willing.
absolutely.
There's actually been a lot of times where we've spoken to really great guests on the show, and then we just end on a note where it's like, okay, we got sufficient amount. This one is where like, no, we need you to come back for like 2 or 3 more, because
That would
there's
be
so much to unpack. You're very well spoken. You're very intelligent. Like, you clearly, like, you read a lot of books. So like we want to engage with you more if you're willing to have us.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And next time I'll tell you guys about the CE5 group that I go to every Saturday. We meet up at the beach and we follow Steve Greer's alien protocols for
Yes. Okay.
contact.
Oh, okay.
So that's pretty cool. And I'll talk to you guys about that too and the experiences I had there. So
That would
Nice.
be awesome. Natalia, before we let you go, where can the listeners find you?
oh my gosh, I have to get back on TikTok. I used to be on it for a while and do little memes, but I'm online. It's Natalia, NATTIE _ Natalia with 2 T's. I have to change it probably to make the people find me better. NATTAL.
We'll add your TikTok to the episode
That would
description.
be awesome.
No,
Yes.
absolutely.
It was fantastic talking with you guys, definitely. And I look forward to the following ones.
And folks, we will put her TikTok in the show description below. So go ahead and give her a follow if you enjoyed today's episode. And thank you for listening. Thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and most podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe and share. Also, don't forget to give a follow on Instagram at twroadpodcast and follow my TikTok at twrpodcast. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.